Hello and welcome to another in our Podcamp Media Virtual Open House series. I'm Dusty Weiss, president and founder of Podcamp Media, a podcast production company for brands and associations that want to use podcasting for their business. We recently opened the doors to our brand new podcast studio in downtown Milwaukee, and since we can't have y'all here, we're celebrating with a parade of local luminaries and interesting folks in this virtual open house series. And our guest today is all that and more. Kristin Brey is a writer, a digital producer, a comedian. She's a video columnist for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. She's an advocate for fair legislative maps, and she is the creative force behind As Goes Wisconsin, which a lot of folks have heard of. A lot more people are starting to hear about now. So, Kristin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. That was quite the rundown.
I feel
like you described me better than when people ask me, like, what do you do? I'm like, well, you're on TikTok?
Well, and so that's sort of my first question for you is people like to put people in boxes, right? Mm-hmm. You know, oh, that guy's a firefighter. Oh, she's a nurse, you know? And so it's very hard to have a complicated job title. And so when people ask you, well, what is it that you do? What do you tell them?
I still haven't quite figured out how to say it.
You haven't dialed that in yet?
Because it's hard to get to explain what I'm doing without talking about where I've been. Because when I first started making videos, and I knew that I wanted to blend politics and comedy and kind of teach myself how to be someone who could ever be considered to be a correspondent on The Daily Show, or I just always was inspired by the use of comedy to explain complicated topics and the use of entertainment/comedy to get people more interested in important but boring topics. Largely redistricting and gerrymandering is a perfect example.
Not a whole lot of native interest in that at the end of the day.
Not a whole lot of native interest because for me, and so I kind of just taught myself how to do it. And there were very few, but certain individuals who was like, oh, they're kind of journalists. They're kind of comedians, they're kind of entertainer personalities, but they're on camera and they're making stuff that is short and interesting. And at least as I find it interesting. And that's the kind of stuff I want to make. And I don't really know what that title is. And it's not a job that you look for on a job board and you apply to. And so it was kind of this leap of faith of like, I'm just going to teach myself how to do this and figure it out as I go. And so I still don't quite know. Like the video columnist thing, that was a George Stanley at Journal Sentinel idea of like what to call me, because it is what I'm doing for them is opinion. And largely what I do is opinion, but informational. So I kind of like video columnist, but largely it's like punditry. It's like,
I was going to say video columnist has more of a ring than TikTok pundit.
Yes. Well, TikTok makes me think of like, you know, like, are you a teen? Oh, I just went down a little bit. Are you a teenager? And so, no. So yeah, so I would say it's a combination of political pundit meets comedian.
Mm-hmm. You were born in Wisconsin.
Born in Madison, Wisconsin.
But you blazed a really interesting trail to wind up pretty much all the way around the country and then back in Wisconsin again.
I literally did a perfect circle. So I was born in Madison. When I was 16, I moved to Los Angeles to be an actress. And that was fun and interesting. I learned a lot. But by the time I was 20, I was like, I should go to college, and decided to start at a community college and then transfer to UC Berkeley, that's where I got much more interested in politics and social issues and public health and public policy, thinking I would graduate and work for like an international NGO handing out birth control in like Kenya.
Important work.
Yes,
important work.
Like family planning around the globe. But it was the Bay Area, and it was 2011, and the job that I got was in tech, and because that's what most of the jobs in San Francisco are. And so then I worked in tech sales for about 7 years. And that was kind of just the inertia of I kept getting promoted. I was good enough. Never really cared about technology. Never really like startups were interesting enough because it's exciting to build something. It's exciting to learn how to build something. But the product turns out like B2B SaaS, like software as a service is not what I'm passionate about. And so,
but there are people that are passionate about it, and they are so passionate about it.
So then I moved from San Francisco with my company at the time to New York. That happened to be at the December of 2016. So Trump had just gotten elected. I got out of the tech bubble that is San Francisco into New York, where there's so many people doing so many different things. And then probably basically within 6 months, I was like, I can't sell software for the rest of my life. I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I know it's not this. And so I quit without a real plan. And then I started doing performing again. So I hadn't performed. I quit when I was 20, and that was so in 10 years. And so I started doing improv classes. I started doing stand-up. I started doing sketch. And most importantly, I started teaching myself how to make videos. And so I took like editing classes to learn Premiere. I started trying to figure out how do you research a topic and turn it into a 2-minute video, a 5-minute video. Like, how do you look at what Jon Stewart for sure, but John Oliver for Last Week Tonight. It's a long show, but like straight to camera, over the shoulder. I'm going to make a point, and I'm also going to teach you something, and I'm going to throw some jokes in there. And I just started doing it. And then I went back to LA. So all of a sudden we're starting the circle. So then I went back to LA thinking I might be able to like pitch and sell that show, like idea, what was called Below the Fold, to someone. And then I had the idea of doing a documentary about Wisconsin voters and how weird they are for 2020.
Oh my gosh.
And I had set up a bunch of interviews and was not planning to move home, but just came home to do the interviews for the spring election in 2020. So I got back to Wisconsin Rapids, where my parents live now, and on March 15th. And by March 17th, everything was shut down.
The world stopped.
And I didn't, and all the ways that I was making money in Los Angeles also stopped. And so it was one of those moments of like, I guess I'm going to hang out here for a little while. And it just kind of pivoted. It basically went from trying to figure out what a documentary could be or would have to look like, especially without having any funding to do it, to people telling me, we're trying to show people how to get their absentee ballot. And I was like, oh, I know how to do that. I know how to do like close-ups and explainers and GIFs and highlights and like animation, like kind of faux animation. And so I just started making Get Out the Vote comedic content that was specifically targeted to Wisconsin folks. So it was like Wisconsin Charlie Barron's type humor, but with information on this is how you register to vote. This is how you get your absentee ballot. This is how you know where a ballot box is. This is who's on your ballot. I leveraged my mother a lot because that was, you work with what you got. And when you're quarantined in Wisconsin Rapids.
She was running the camera.
No, she was on screen.
Oh, okay.
My mom's a character. She was great.
Gosh.
She was a crowd favorite. And so then when that started to take off, I was like, I guess I'm moving back to Wisconsin. And so literally it was Wisconsin, LA, San Francisco, New York, LA, Wisconsin. So it really was full. And now I'm back and I'm as happy as I've ever been.
You know, we talked a little bit before we started this, but I certainly didn't make the circuit that you did, but I spent some time away from Wisconsin on the East Coast in a really strange and wonderful place called Miami. And great place to visit. I would never live there again.
Yeah.
But I also know from that and from having traveled a lot, spent a lot of time in New York and LA, that the folks on the coast, they look at the Midwest and they've got kind of an attitude about it. Not an attitude, it's more like a lack of curiosity. They look at it and they say, it's not for me. And when I lived in Miami, I dated a little bit when I was out there and dated a young woman. And I remember pretty much the death knell in that relationship, if it could be called that, was one time when I was sitting here, I was talking about, I'm going to go back to Madison for Easter. I'm going to see my family. I'm going to go eat some cheese. I'm going to do that. And oh my gosh, you'd love it so much. It's such a cool place. And she's like, no, I'm not really into flyover country. And she used that term and literally like a week later we were done. And so all that is to say, I like to tell people that I'm Wisconsin by choice, that I moved out. I've sampled the coasts. I've traveled abroad. This is a place that I choose to be here because there are things that I love about it and things that I think are really wonderful. So what makes you Wisconsin by choice? Oh,
it's funny because I feel like I'm very much like that as well. It was less of, I'm not making money in LA or whatever. It's like, there's oxygen here to do something that I really have been wanting to do. But because the oversaturation and so much competition and so much of the hustle culture of New York or LA, it's like, Wisconsin's ripe for fresh, fun ideas, and everyone wants the same thing, and they want something that's like made for them, but not that many other people are doing it. And so what I found in coming back, and what really started to make me feel like, oh, this is going to be great, was one, just how quickly I found an audience and how the stuff that I was making was resonating. But even more than that was like, for most of 2020, there was like, I had this idea of, all right, this is such a different year for normal organizers who are trying to get out the vote, who are used to knocking door to door, who are used to doing stuff in person, and they can't. And not a lot of them necessarily are trained to be digital content makers of how they're going to get a message out. And so the amount of just calls I was on, and every call would end with, oh, you got to talk to this person, this person, this person. And people actually followed up on it. Right? Like the amount of the call would end, and then there would immediately be an email of me needing to talk to this other person. And those people would take a call. Right? And so it's like the combination of people actually following up on their word and wanting to genuinely help, and then also the reception of the people they would introduce me to. And so how quickly you could start to make something happen versus what I'd always felt, no matter what industry I was working in, is like, whether you want to call it ego or ambition or navel gazers or, like the intensity of some of our major cities that attracts people who have this idea that to be at the top of their game, they have to be in those major metropolitan areas. It creates a kind of like self-preservation of that infects, I think, your personality and how much you're willing to help the people around you, which I felt like, and I'm sure I'm not saying everyone in Wisconsin is a saint. I'm just saying it was such a breath of fresh air to come back and try to start something and have so many people offer what they could to keep it moving forward, even though this was like this very nebulous thing that like I didn't even know how to fully describe. And so for me, what's been great about, especially even more specific to Milwaukee, is like Milwaukee's a city. Milwaukee's top 20, top 30 most populous cities in the country, but it feels like a community. Like in every other place I've ever lived, I always kind of felt like I was a visitor.
Yeah.
I
know exactly what you mean. Right? I used to lose my you-know-what in Miami when I would be stopping at the grocery store to pick up what I need. You go in, you do your thing, you take your bags out of the cart, you put your bags in the car, and then what do? You put the cart back in the cart corral. And nobody in South Florida knows how to use a GD cart corral.
I like the PG nature of your vocabulary.
Believe me, when the microphone is off, it's not so PG. But it seems like a little thing, but I think it's indicative of a broader trend that you see in those big metropolitan coastal worldly cities, is that everybody is a tourist there. Even the people that have lived there for 5-10 years, they don't see themselves as part of a community. They see themselves as passing through. I mean, in Miami, they can't fill Sun Life Stadium or whatever they call it now. They can't get enough people to go to Dolphins games because nobody in Miami is a Dolphins fan. Yeah. They're all New York fans and Cowboys fans, and God bless them, Packers fans, because the Packers fans show up in South Florida.
Yeah.
But we don't have that problem around here. People are invested in their Wisconsin identity.
Like I think that's also why some like Wisconsin jokes play, because Wisconsinites love Wisconsin. And like, as partisan and divided in politics as this state can be, like everyone bleeds green and gold. And like, we love our sports teams, and we love kind of some of the traditions that everyone pretty much gets on board with, whether it's cheese and beer and brats. And so I think like the community aspect of this is the first time I've felt like I know who the aldermen are. I know, it's like I'm invested more in like the actual stuff of like how the city works versus my own universe of my work, my rent or whatever. But I actually feel just much more committed and also like connected, because when we were talking before the pod, how many people do we know in common? Right.
Right. Already. Instantly.
And I've only lived here for a year. Right. And like, granted, I'm very active, but like you can do that. Like it's so much easier to feel like you can make a difference in the city, in the state, if you just apply yourself, because it's just a little bit more manageable than, a 12 million person metropolitan area of like LA or Manhattan. And so, yeah, so I would say I choose to be here. And I think I will always choose to be here from now on because it just feels like home, and it feels like there's a lot more opportunity here to make an impact, but also to do the exact thing that I've been wanting to do.
Well, and let's talk about that thing that you're doing then, because, you started out making informational videos about how to get your absentee ballot, and that was important, and you turned some heads and made some people laugh, and that was awesome. But you very quickly chose to dig into some really thick and meaty topics. And a lot of what you see on TikTok or on Instagram, and I'm starting to feel like an old man because I'm not on either of those things. And so I'm very close to calling it the TikTok. Oh, and Twitter.
And Twitter.
And
I love Twitter.
You're good on Twitter. But a lot of what you see on those is not very substantive. No. And so you have chosen to essentially take these tactics that you see on TikTok and Instagram and the style thereof and weaponize it for something important. What drew you to something as heady as partisan redistricting? As sort of a cause celeb that you've championed and really become a front-running spokesperson for?
I think when Donald Trump got elected and I was living and working in San Francisco and was very consumed with my life, and I had been into politics when I was in college, but kind of like we're saying, like I'd kind of become a navel gazer a little bit of like very concerned and stressed about my job of managing tech bros and having them hit their number and my dating life and was certainly, and like you're just truly that when that if you go back to 2016 of like this idea of these like bubbles that we all live in of like these echo chambers of what we hear, what we know, and like just the assumption that like there's no way Donald Trump will be president. And I was not alone, but there's this whole wave of post Donald Trump of people just getting more politically active, and the run for something, and the amount of women, like the record amount of women who had never run for anything before that ran in 2018, and I think that certainly activated that his election certainly activated me to kind of be like, oh, like there's not other people taking care of it, and like if you don't take care of your lowercase d democracy, it can erode. And I think that was certainly the turning point. But like, I didn't know when I first kind of like light bulb went off, that was like, I can't sell software. I need to do something that matters. That was like the core of who I always, even when I was acting, I always thought that the acting and what drew me to it was I love to perform, but also to do projects that make a difference. Like, you think about like Blood Diamond. And is that the name of the Leonardo DiCaprio movie?
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet.
But yeah, it was like
I'm getting a thumbs up from Larry in the producer's
years
booth.
ago, right?
So
it's
Blood
like,
Diamond. Yeah.
It's like Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio. I forgot who the woman was in. It sometimes takes big movie stars to be in big movies, but that are on serious topics for people to actually even be aware that it's happening. And so that was with acting. That's kind of what I always thought was cool and interesting. And then once I kind of came around and had more maturity and life experience doing other things, I knew it wasn't necessarily, do I want to just like go sign up and try to work for like a nonprofit? But so it kind of was just this feeling of information is important, but how do you get people who are apathetic to care about information that is boring? And, I mean, it is boring. Gerrymandering is boring. And it kind of came from that mission of, how do you find the things that matter, that when you read a 10-page Atlantic article about it, your eyes glaze over, or for a lot of people, it glazes over. And
mine glaze over.
Make it more digestible and accessible to people who are either busy or don't know that they should care about this, or just don't, they just didn't know because they don't read the newspaper anymore. Or that's not what they're attracted to. That's not the content they're consuming. And so it became the mission of like, how do you take what, in my humble opinion is important stuff for us to be aware of, and make it a little bit more fun to consume.
So you're more than a year into this thing now. You've been doing this. Obviously, you've gotten greater and greater exposure. You're now the video columnist at the Journal Sentinel, which is awesome. What do you hear from folks? Have you moved the needle? Are there people that didn't know what gerrymandering was before who are now like, let's get some fair maps?
For me, it's all, so much of it ends up being anecdotal because it's comment sections and that's kind of what you have to go off of versus I'm not a great marketing analytics person that can really look at the numbers and be like, this is what it's telling us. It's like the least favorite part of this whole thing. I will say my favorite story is, this was early 2021. I did a handful of videos about the superintendent election that happened in April. And I think we had after having record turnout last fall for the 2020 presidential election, it was 7%. And so not a lot of people voted, but I had someone who left a comment saying, this was the first election I've ever voted in that wasn't a presidential election. And it's because of your videos. And
that's a W. That's a W.
That was a W. And that felt really, and I don't know who she voted for. I don't know what her politics are because it was just a comment left. But that whenever I get a comment that says something along the lines of, I wouldn't have known about this had I not seen your videos, or, people say I'm too busy and they're scrolling through TikTok kind of just as mindless end of day stuff. And they come across something that I did that they didn't know about. That certainly is not infrequent that people give me that feedback. Did I move the needle? I don't know. But those always feel good. And I certainly get feedback of people who certainly don't agree with me. But I try to, as much as I can.
No, there's plenty of feedback in that department. Yeah.
But I try to approach it. I certainly have some mutuals who use their platform to just roast the other side. That is certainly not the approach that I've decided to take. I've tried to stay away from being mean or low-hanging fruit of making fun of what people look like versus what their actual actions are, and making fun of that if I'm going to make fun of someone. So it's I try to approach topics while still having a point of view without people who would necessarily disagree with me immediately go, well, this isn't for me, and just flip it. And I've had, those are the other comments I always love, is when people say things along the lines of, I don't always agree with what you say, but I appreciate how you say it. So that feels good too.
I feel like that's the best feedback that you can get as a member of the punditry, as a member of the media, whatever you want to call it. And frankly, I think that's feedback that we don't get nearly as often as we should, or if it does come in, it's drowned out by the nasty.
Yeah, the fringe people, not the fringe, but the on both sides of the rallying of your base, or the people who already agree with you. We got a lot of that. There's definitely got a lot of that.
What about the state lawmakers on either side of the aisle? Do you ever hear? I mean, I'm dying to think I'm dying to hear what Robin Voss thinks of the shtick that you do, where you put on the red blazer and pretend to be Robin Voss, and then put on the blue blazer and pretend to be somebody from the other side of the aisle. But have
Robin's never reached out to me. But it's funny. I have some inside knowledge because I asked once. Curious, just because, especially because Twitter is Twitter. But any of those guys post anything, and just the amount of people who in their comments just rip them apart. And so I asked someone who knows all of these people, and he goes, well, Steineke doesn't read anything. And he'll post stuff, and then he just doesn't read the comments, and he just turns it off. He's like, Robin reads everything. I was like, oh, so that definitely means he saw the video I did when I made fun of him, honoring himself. and so I have yet to have any Republican state lawmakers reach out to me, which is not surprising, but it is what it is. I've had plenty of I'm friends with plenty of Democratic state lawmakers. I think that's where I lean. I would love to get to the point where I have a big enough audience or influence or whatever that Republican state lawmakers feel like they have to reach out to me, because I am kind of across the board. Like I talk to a lot of different people and not just one side, but I'm not there yet.
Though, and stop me if we're not allowed to go public with this yet, but you're going to be filling in on
we could definitely.
The state's flagship news talk station. That's the week of Christmas, right?
Yeah. So
the week of Christmas, you'll be filling in on WTMJ.
Yeah. So
That's a platform.
That is a platform. Yeah.
To rattle some doorknobs.
Yeah,
there.
for sure. So I feel really lucky that this even happened. But for the last year, I've been on with Steve Scafidi on Wednesdays. I'd come in for like an hour and talk about a variety of issues. And I think whether it was the timbre of my voice or the point of view I provided, but they kind of, the different people at Good Karma Brands, who owns WTMJ now, had asked, what do you think about radio? What do you think you'd want to do this more? Would you like to start filling in? And so I did my first fill-in job where I wasn't a guest. I was running the show last week, and I obviously did a good enough job because they asked if I could cover for Steve while he's out from 8:30 to 12 from the 27th to the 31st. So the last week of the year, I will be getting up early. Can't drink that week, so I can't be hungover on the radio.
Believe me, I worked in radio for 10 years. You can be hungover on the radio.
Perfect. Yeah. So yeah, but I'm excited. It's such a different platform. It's different not only from obviously 60-second short videos that are scripted and planned out and you can delete the take if you don't like it, but it's also different than podcasting, because podcasting, you kind of just have the conversation. In live radio, it's 6-minute segments, and then you're to commercial break, and then you're to the news, and it goes really quickly, and you're trying to pay attention to the text line, and you're trying to like make eyes with your producer. And so there's a lot more going on that just is different than anything else I've ever done. But I like it. Like it's long form, it's conversations. And I think, like you just said, it's also talking to a lot of people who have never even heard of me and would never find me on social media because of whatever algorithm we are all in on any given platform. So it's really cool to bring my point of view, as there's not a ton of women historically on that station. There's not a ton of young people on that station. And I commend them that
there's not a ton of left-leaning people on that. I mean, this is the station that gave rise to Charlie Sykes.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that they're making choices to really look and be like, who do we want to be? And like, do we want to try to reach new audiences? Do we want to be more broad versus a conservative, like historically conservative talk radio? And I think I commend them that I think they do want to get different, younger gender, like, and reach more people. Obviously still be respectful to who they've been and who their audience is, but also know that to survive is to evolve. And
to get people into the habit of having conversations with people that they may not agree entirely with again. And having worked in talk radio for as long as I did, I can tell you it is very much a space that is very firmly rooted in not ever challenging people's beliefs.
Yeah.
And it caters to a very, very specific demography, and it caters to a very, very specific political bent, and will bend over backwards, sometimes consuming itself in order to avoid offending those people. And so for TMJ to do this, even this small gesture toward, and having Scafidi is another step in this direction too. He's a very middle of the road guy. He
says he's a conservative, and I'm like, okay, if that's how you want to identify yourself, but he is pretty moderate. Like he is definitely of the rational, like certain stuff when it comes to like crime and like business decisions. We don't always agree, but like he's certainly a never Trumper. He certainly is on the rational side of like thinking the stuff that's happened at school boards, like kind of like the outlandish behavior that we've seen in the last year. He's the first to condemn that. And so he, so I would say he's more moderate than I hope he's listening. He's certainly, I always say that it's like, because he and I don't disagree on that much. But yeah, I would say that he was a departure from, but even Charlie Sykes, it seems like, I don't know. It's such a weird political world that we now live in of like, who agrees with what, because like the departure of like conservatism and the Republican Party and what they're dealing with internally of like, who do we want to be? Like, do we want to lean into the Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, quote unquote patriots side of things, or are we fiscal conservatives who care about small government and like, but
also believe in democratic values,
common decency, and not like calling your colleague like the jihad squad, and and
that's the world that we live in now.
And like, not that like the big tent of Democrats is not equally as messy and like, who do we want to be? Because that's the party with a problem with a two-party system. But I digress. And but yeah, anyways, I'm going to be on WTMJ on the last week of December.
That's going to be awesome. That's going to be a great platform for you. And I hope that you get a chance to use it to have those conversations with some people that you would not typically get to interact with. Because ultimately, to bring this back full circle to what we were talking about before, ultimately conversation is like voting. It is an institution of our democracy. But also, if you're only doing it in a vacuum and only doing it in a group of people who thinks like you do, that's where the toxicity starts.
Totally.
If you're not interacting with people from across the aisle, if you have districts that are drawn in such a way that they're skewed so far to one direction or the other, that's where the toxicity comes in, because a legislator who doesn't have to answer to people who have different views from them is able to go way, way, way out into right or left field, and it just becomes a problem.
Well, I think that's trying to break through the noise. If we go back to like talking about redistricting and gerrymandering and why it's a problem, obviously when we're in Wisconsin, where we're very gerrymandered, skewed towards Republicans, but you go to just south of us in Illinois, they're super gerrymandered towards Democrats. So this is a practice that it has been happening since like the 1800s. And so obviously it's a lot more now because of the technology that we have and how precise you can get. But the feedback often it becomes partisan as far as, well, you're just angry because Republicans have control and like, and I would like it this way or whatever. And I think the deeper cut of gerrymandering is that it becomes when we have non-competitive seats where everything is cut so that it's a foregone conclusion of who's going to be, which party is going to be elected, then it becomes which person in that party can double down the most on whatever the rhetoric is that appeals to that core base. Because only like 20% of voters vote in primaries. Yeah. And so while we have partisan primaries, your biggest obstacle to keeping your seat, if you're an incumbent, is someone who's more to the left or more to the right of you that can rally more people for that primary and kick you out, because then you're going to win the general. And so that's why, I mean, just yesterday, they had a hearing on Final Five voting, which is kind of a version of ranked choice voting, where it gets rid of partisan primaries. And so everyone who's running, and then the top five move on to a general election, no matter so in certain districts, and maybe you just get 5 Republicans who are in the general election, but you still have to rank them.
Maybe the craziest one doesn't get the pick.
Exactly, because you're putting,
just by appealing to
this is my first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, and the bottom peoples keep getting redistributed. It's hard to explain right now, but it's like gets redistributed so that likely the person who's the most popular does win versus the person who has the simple majority. And that I think could do I think partisan primaries in general, I think we end up with people that not everyone likes. And I don't know. I think the more things we can do to curb hyper partisanship in our election process and not get the most outlandish people elected versus the people who are more prone to compromise because they have to make the majority of their constituents happy and also know that they need to try to get things done. Like, that sounds like a better state / world / country.
Just about anything sounds like a better state right now, but it is what it is. Looking at the 2020 redistricting process, the state Supreme Court has weighed in. They are, of course, comprised mostly of a conservative majority that, Supreme Court members, they run for 10-year terms, and in a spring election, and not a lot of people vote in spring elections. And so here we are. Is there a happy ending for 2020 redistricting, or is the plan now just everybody actually get out and vote in the spring elections and we'll try again in 2030, which by the way, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah. So the way I understand it from different groups who work even more intimately in it than I do is the Supreme Court stated that the major criteria for any new maps is going to be at least amount of change. And so even this week, Governor Evers submitted his maps that followed those guidelines. And so basically it's largely, we will be close to what the maps were that we've had for the last 10 years. The only kind of
the maps that gave Republicans approximately
basically a secured 60-30 split in the assembly,
even though Democrats got 52% of the vote in the governor's race.
Well, each year it's hard because, like I said, there's a lot of races go uncontested, and so it's hard to sometimes say, it's like, well, if there was no for popular vote compared to in like just the assembly. And so it's looking at the numbers, sometimes it's hard to really understand. But if you look at the graphs between 2012 and 2020 of like a line graph of the popular vote in every 2 years, and then how many seats the assembly got every 2 years. And the popular vote is all over the place. So it's like kind of because we're a swing state, it does exactly what you think it does. Some years there was way more Republicans who voted so the popular vote count is that. And in some years, only in the last 10 years, and some years like 2018, there's huge turnout of Democrats. But literally the line for assembly seats, it's like 61, 62, 63, 62. Like that does not change no matter how much the popular vote changes. And I felt like if you get into the nuances and you get nerds who can poke holes in it, it's not quite as straightforward as that, but it's a good, when people say that they basically baked in an impenetrable 60 seat majority, they kind of did that. And that's probably what we're going to deal with for the next 10 years. And so I'm not a political strategist in any way, but I would think that some of the ways that we have more representation of our very much purple 50-50 state is we don't let races go uncontested and try to push on issues versus just party will be good. But yeah, the maps we have if the federal courts get involved, it will likely be a couple districts in Milwaukee because of just the Voters' Rights Act of like majority minority districts and making sure that those are protected. But there certainly will not start from scratch. So
10 more years of that.
10 more years of Robin Vos getting 19,000 votes and being the most powerful person in the state.
Well, and at least that's 10 more years of you getting to trot out that red blazer and maybe have a little bit of fun with it.
It is a good red blazer.
I'll say this. You are relentlessly positive. How do you keep up that relentless positivity and that approach and that level of motivation, especially in the face of what's kind of a bleak situation right now? How do you do it?
I think it's because I'm just incredibly, I think I'm in the very lucky position where I get to choose to care about these issues versus a lot of my friends who, if things get voted on a certain way, they are at the front lines of who it affects. So whether that's the Black population or the Latino population or the gay population or people who are poor and don't have safety nets, I think there's a lot of people who are the first people affected where they don't have a choice if they care or not because it affects them so directly. I'm largely can be a person who is unaffected if I chose to be and could be apathetic if I chose to be. So I think it kind of gives me it's a little bit easier for me to make jokes and it's kind of a bleak answer instead of being like, I'm just a natural optimist. We're going to be fine. It's largely because I'm very
you get to approach it from a position of privilege.
And privileged. Yeah. And it's I choose to do this because I think I have a skill for it. And I think the amount of people who are in the trenches on this, who've thanked me and who've asked me, I don't know how you make jokes about this. I was because I don't do your job. It's because I'm not in there every day feeling the pain and the heartache and the defeat that happens. It's I kind of get to stay outside of it and at least I get to be entertaining about it and try to make some jokes and keep people invested and informed. But some of the jobs that some of these my friends have, it's like,
oh, I know. Well,
this is why I would never want to run. People ask me all the time to run for something, and I'm like, I like what I do. Like, this is way more fun than dealing with all of the problems.
I think that's a good insight. I think that, and I think that you're going to find out very soon what that side of the coin, what that world is like, because as you have sort of made Wisconsin your home again, you've had some news recently.
I've had some
congratulations.
Some personal news. I met some. That was the other thing. I was like, oh, I guess I've. So it's like not only career stuff that has gone very well here, but I also met the love of my life in Milwaukee, and we're engaged. And while I think on the surface, people probably thought I was the more political of the two, because he is an entrepreneur and event planner. He has thrown his name in for the special election for mayor of Milwaukee.
I wish him the very best, and I hope that this is a learning opportunity, one way or the other.
That is the way that we are. I mean, he's definitely running to win. I think there's also realistic expectations that in any kind of very
everybody and their
race,
uncle has jumped into that mayor's race now.
It's a lot of, and as a first time candidate, there's a huge learning curve. But I think as we both are very invested in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin, and I think for him, he's excited to see if politics and making a difference in that way is the route to take. And I think by running, like there's only one way to find out, right? And you run and either you get elected and then you really find out, or you run and you like it, so you run again, or you run and you're like, ooh, this is not for me, and I'm going to find other ways to help and be a part of the community. And so, but you don't figure any of that out unless you just do it. And so I'm proud of him. I'm excited. I've never worked on a campaign before. And so I'm excited to learn everything I will learn by helping him. I think he's going to learn a ton about the city that he maybe never knew before. And so I think overall it'll be a positive experience, no matter what the outcome is.
Well, and I'll say this. I think one thing that really excites me about the mayor's race as it's shaping up right now is that there are so many younger people in the mix right now.
Besides
it's
Bob
not
Donovan.
Just the...
Not young. Bob Donovan, not young. Everyone else, very young.
Bob Donovan, perennial candidate. Oh my gosh.
And
I'm
love
going to tell you
so,
some Bob Donovan
so
stories
far,
later.
like most of his stuff is just like rants on Facebook.
I mean,
how boomer of you.
But talk about speaking to your constituency. My goodness.
Yeah. And so but I think, because like Marina is probably under 40 or early 40s.
Right in
Chevy
there. Chevy
is mid 30s, early 30s. Mike's in his late 30s. Who am I missing? Well, Ernell's up there with Donovan, but I don't think this is the end of who will run. Like, I think because the redistricting maps are not set yet, because we don't even know if Ron Johnson's running or not yet. I feel like it's late in the what feels like a campaign cycle that should have already started for next fall. But because no one knows what the actual districts for any of these things are going to be, who runs where and who's still deciding what they will run for, I think will still play out, especially because we don't even know when the mayoral election, the special election will be, because
the Senate hasn't moved
Mayor
yet.
Barrett has still not actually been confirmed. And so...
little update from when we had him in here recently.
So we don't know...
Still don't know when he becomes the ambassador, plenipotentiary, and extraordinary to the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, but we're waiting on that.
What I love about that is it's basically the same population, but like 10 times the money of like the GDP of Luxembourg, despite being the same, like basically geographic size and population of Milwaukee is a lot more money.
Yeah. He's going to enjoy that assignment. I get the feeling it's going to be pretty cushy. One thing about the very bleak outlook for 2020 Fair Maps is that you at least are going to remain relevant for as long as you choose to, I think, at this point. But as you look ahead, as you look at everything that you've accomplished over the last year and a half, but then you look ahead to what's next. We kind of hinted at that a little bit, but what's on the As Goes Wisconsin Christmas list right now? What are you hoping for that the future might hold?
Well, it's interesting because as of right now, like what is As Goes Wisconsin and what is Kristin Brey is kind of like, if it's a Venn diagram, it's basically also a circle. But I would love to have more separation between those two as I Kristin Brey, do stuff with WTMJ or do stuff with Journal Sentinel or moderate or host a thing that is me showing up as me versus the content that continues to live under like an As Goes Wisconsin brand is comedy and information, but maybe includes more voices. So like I would love to, I actually volunteered for the Milwaukee Comedy Fest to try to meet more comedians in the area and try to meet more people who would like to contribute, whether that be in writing or in videos, or kind of have the big dream would be have As Goes Wisconsin kind of be its own Daily Show-esque like alternative media outlet that's for Wisconsin, that obviously takes more than just one person making some TikTok videos. That obviously needs some money and some guidance, and I think is a long-term goal and project. But that is kind of, I think, certainly for the short term of 2022, because we'll be back in midterms year of like having a governor's race, having a Senate race, having all of the Congress, having state senators, having an assembly, having a mayor race. Like I think we'll definitely go back to the roots of a lot of voting, electoral, these are your candidates, this is how you vote, these are the dates you need to be aware of content. While I simultaneously get to do all the other projects that actually pay me. But I think the long term is like, because I'm here and because this is the stuff that I care about, and it's like, it's so much more mission driven than financially like opportunity driven, that it will continue just to kind of grow and be its thing that is an outlet for all things Wisconsin, but specifically for news and political and voting information. That's still kind of funny.
Well, again, I think, my love of The Daily Show and all things fake news is well documented. And so I'm eager to see it continue to grow, and certainly grateful that you made your way back to Wisconsin one way or the other. But anything else to add at this point? Anything that we didn't touch on?
I don't know. I mean, there's certainly, we are on so many tangents before we started, so we could take this a lot of different places, but I don't know if we have the time.
I was going to say, maybe we'll turn it into a regular series with Kristin Brey.
Exactly.
But Kristin Brey, TikTok pundit, digital media producer, person who does a lot of things and makes me chuckle. Thank you for joining us. And we are Podcamp Media, state-of-the-art podcast studio for brands and associations that want to use podcasting to tell their stories. Visit podcampmedia.com/news to sign up for our email newsletter and get an invite next spring when, hopefully, if we haven't moved on to the Zeta variant or whatever the heck we'll be at that point, we will have an in-person open house. We can cross our fingers and hope for the best. But for now, stay tuned to Podcamp Media on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn for more of these virtual open house discussions. Coming up next month, we're going to have Amy Kiankio from Big Brothers Big Sisters of Metro Milwaukee on, a program that's near and dear to my heart. And of course, make sure to check out our flagship podcast, Lead Balloon, as well as the great shows that we produce every day on behalf of our clients.